Anybody else need a copy of the questions for this morning? Just to look on where we're going. Okay. All right. So John the 8th chapter is still a continuation of Jesus, and where is Jesus at the point in this text that we're looking at in John 8? He is where? What's going on? He's what? I heard the temple part. Where'd you say the first? Okay. Okay, the Jews in the temple. What feast is going on? That's what I should have asked. The Feast of the Booths, okay, which was them going back to the Old Testament, the wilderness wanderings, and they were to make booths to remind them of God's providence and care for them. And so here they are with Jesus having come here. He's made some declarations. Verse 37 of chapter 7, Jesus stood up and cried out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the Scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." Now this he said about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For as yet the Spirit had not been given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. So that becomes an important part in terms of John 14, 15, and 16. And then ultimately in John 20, where the Spirit comes upon his disciples and so forth in prospect. So we come to chapter 8, and the general thought of scholars is that verse 52 belongs to chapter 8, that the first 11 verses, and I'm not going into long discussion or discourse about the first 11 verses, whether or not they belong here or they're here. We're going to talk about them and just leave it at that. If you've got some questions you want to talk about variant text, I'm happy to talk with you about it. I'm happy to tell you what my view of all of this is. But for now, our study is that John 8, 1 through 11 is in the text, and it proves nothing one way or the other. Whether we believe it should be there or somewhere else, or it should not be in there at all. It proves absolutely nothing. It doesn't change anything. This is certainly a story that you could see happening in the lifetime of Jesus, at least at some point. It made it in enough manuscripts that it is found in this one, and so that we consider it at this point. So that's all I want to say about that point, unless you've got something you just feel like needs to be said here. Okay, so John 7, verse 52, they replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee." Then verse 53 is where it really... They went each to his own house, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives early in the morning. He came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin, and from now on sin no more." Okay, so here is a test, typical. This is a period of conflict that Jesus is in with the religious of his day. And so they bring this woman to him, and so Jesus has this conversation with her. The irony of all of this is pretty, well, if it wasn't for the fact they were trying to trap him, it'd be pretty funny what they're trying to accomplish here and what they're saying about all of this. So let me go to my first question. What are some of the lessons that we learned from John 8, 1 through 11? Now, I'm sorry, I did not put my answers on the board, so you won't be able to see my answers, but I will have the questions up here. And so... So what are some lessons that you would say that we could learn from John 1, verses 8 through John 8, verses 1 through 11. Okay. Go ahead, Gary. Finish.
Today will use the same methods.
Yeah, the Pharisees were not adverse to using the scriptures for their own purposes as people are today. And so certainly they came with that sort of mindset in mind that here we've got this woman in adultery. Betty makes the point that the problem with this is that they didn't have, but where are the witnesses? We caught her in the act, as if to say they actually literally caught her in the act. What's the problem with all of that? Carrie Burke? Okay, they were trying to accuse him to have something against him. What else? What is the problem with this whole account here?
Where's the man?
Where's the man? If you caught them in the act, you should have brought the man too. Jesus sees through their hypocrisy in this and trying to just abuse a woman. This is an interesting text from that standpoint of how Jesus treats women, which I don't want to get in my sermon for this morning. But we are going to talk about some of it. But this is a classic example of the patriarchal society or view of women that was in the first century. They took this woman. The question is, was she really even caught in the act? Did they just grab some homeless person and, who knows? Jesus doesn't condemn her because, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And plus he knows that, which one of you cast the first stone? Which one of you is going to take up the stone? Because under the corporal punishment laws of the Old Testament, whoever made the accusation, and if they were proven, had to be the first one to take a stone to start stoning this person to death who was guilty of a capital offense. So Jesus said, okay, which one of you is going to pick up a stone without sin? Which one of you is going to pick up a stone and start stoning her? There's just so many questions we would have about this text. These men that brought her into the midst, and they start filing out one by one, they make her sound as if she is some kind of local prostitute. You wonder if they weren't guilty of having wrong relationships with her as well. So, Jesus sees through the whole charade of them trying to test him and trying to catch him in different things. Again, I want to emphasize a couple of things to you from John at this point, and that is they have picked up stones, and they're going to do it again to stone Jesus. They want to put him to death. They're trying to catch him in some contradiction to the law. It would be interesting, wouldn't it, to know what Jesus wrote on the ground. I have no idea what he wrote. I have no idea. It would be interesting to know. But, he just stooped down twice and said, let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. So it may be that Jesus wrote that on the ground. I don't know. I have no clue. But it would be interesting to know. Anything else on this lessons that we can learn from this account? All right, the second question is, what is significant about Jesus' claim in John 8 and verse 12? Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So the Pharisees said to him, you are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true. Jesus answered, even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I came from and where I am going, but you do not know where I am coming from or where I am going. You need to underscore that throughout the Gospel of John, where I'm going. He starts in John 7, says, where I'm going, you cannot come. This becomes a question even for the disciples later on in the 13th chapter of the Gospel of John, especially for poor Peter when Jesus said, I'm going away and you cannot come. Peter gets so focused on that, it's as if he he didn't hear what Jesus said in the rest of that, and that is, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another even as I have loved you. And then Peter comes right back to it and says, but Lord, where are you going? It's as if he didn't even hear what the Lord had just said. All he got focused on was the Lord said, I'm going away. And he can't connect all of the dots yet. So this becomes an important point. Jesus is trying to point out to them, I'm going back to where I came from. I came from the Father, I'm going back to the Father. And they couldn't figure that out. And they as we said Wednesday night, the problem is that they never did, all they could see were the physical things, that Jesus came from Nazareth, that Jesus came, no prophet ever rose out of Galilee, blah, 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 and all that. But the things that he did, they couldn't explain. So it never dawns on them to say, okay, maybe God is with him. We have a couple examples. Nicodemus comes to him by night and says, teacher, no man can do these works except God be with him. He recognizes something extraordinary about the things that Jesus is doing. And so he wants to know, really, where is this coming from? And so Jesus has that conversation. But they don't want to see it in that light. They have their mind made up as to what the Scriptures taught. And for that reason, Jesus had already said, you search the Scriptures, for in them you think that you have eternal life, but they are they which testify of me. As we use our illustrations, we did when we were in John 5. It's sort of like going down the street and focusing on the windshield. If you get hung up on a spot on the windshield and that's what you're staring at while you're driving, you know what's going to happen. You're going to have a wreck. They were focused on the windshield. They didn't see it as a lens by which they could see Christ, a lens to look through to see Christ. And so they failed in that regard. So, again, we have this, I'm going away, you don't know where I'm going. You judge according to the flesh, I judge no one. Remember what he going to say again, as he said in verse 24 of John 7, do not judge by appearances, but judge right judgment. And so again, he's pointing out to them, you judge according to the flesh, I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. What gives him the right to make any judgment is the Father who sent him, is God. The Father, his Father. In your law, he said, it is written that the testimony of two people is true. I am the one who bears witness about myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness about me. They said to him, therefore, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. Again, we come to that phrase, his hour had not yet come. An important phrase in the Gospel of John as well. So what is the significant about Jesus' statement in John 8 and verse 12, that I am the light of the world? Goes back to the Old Testament promises. How many times do we read that, for instance, he was going to be a light to the nations. He was going to be a servant in the suffering servant parts of Isaiah. It talks about the light coming into the world and that sort of thing. John 9 is going to be an explanation of some of that as well, of being the light of the world. What else do we know? What else is significant about it? A fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. What else?
Jesus said, he that follows him, walk in light instead of darkness.
So to follow Jesus is to walk in the light and not to be in the darkness. What is Jesus saying? I'm the light of the world. What is the significance? I mean, what you've said is right so far. Well, what else can we point out that's significant about that? Light is essential for all life, which is true. And he is the life and the light of men, John 1. You see how John, as we've talked about it, consistently connects with various things that have gone before. We're going to see it again. Just as we do with water in John, as we started in John 2, water to wine, John 3, water of the Spirit, John 4, the woman at the well, this thirst, John 5, the healing of the man that put down into the water. John 7, Jesus said, I thirst. I mean, for all those who thirst, come to me. John 9, he heals the man again. So water, it becomes very symbolic in in the Gospel of John as well, as does light, becomes very symbolic. And that's where the Gospel of John begins, that Jesus was the light and the life of men. So all life is dependent upon light and so forth. What else is significant about his statement? I am the light of the world. True.
And when you hear read the word, you've got life. If you follow, continue to follow Jesus.
Right. And he's going to make that point in John 8 and verse 31. If you continue in my word, then are you my disciples indeed, for you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, which is true. We have to continue. We would take within the scope of light the good news, the gospel. In fact, you would use Old Testament prophecies, as Dot suggested, to make that point that he was coming in to preach and to give light to the Gentiles, meaning he was going to preach the gospel to the Gentiles. What else is significant about it? There's an important point here. I am the light of... Okay, but I am the light of... What? He's not the light of just Israel. He's the light of the world. This was an important point for them to understand. I didn't come just for you. I'm here as the light of the world. And whoever... Sorry, I started to preach there a little bit. Whoever walks, as Kerry pointed out, follows him, walks in light and not in darkness. So whoever, not just the Jews, but whoever, that has to resonate with them on some level, that he's saying I am the world and he's not making this big, because they're all about Israel, they're all about the Jews, these Pharisees that we're talking about. All right, question number 3 then. Where was Jesus when he made the claim in 8:12 and did much of the teaching and debating with the Jews in the rest of the chapter? I asked that question already, but I'll ask it again. We just read. Where was he? Yeah, I mean, he's in the commerce city. You know, temples in the in the ancient world served as the banking as well, and served for much of the commerce that took place. And in and around the temple and that sort of thing, much trade was done and so forth. So right here, where the majority of people would have been gathering or exchanging and doing business, Jesus is teaching right here in the temple where people can hear him, where those who are trying in some way to test him or trap him in something that he says or does. So right here in this midst, he does this. All right, we go then to anything else on this. We kind of covered this already, but if you want to make a comment, feel free, or ask a question. All right, number 4, who is it that Jesus says will have the light of life? We answered this one. Those that follow him. As I told you in our introduction to the Gospel of John, the word belief in the Gospel of John is never passive. It's a verb form, and it's always active. And so when you read follow, you read different words. They all have within them the idea of what belief is all about. Belief is about following Jesus. I mean, really, when you talk about being a Christian, what we would say about that is that the beginning and ending of being a Christian is following Jesus. And everything else we do is measured by that. I mean, I think it's sufficient that we say to one another, I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm a Christian. What does that mean? Well, it means I follow Jesus. That's the beginning of my life. That's going to be it all the way through. So everything I do is going to be measured by that. I think it's a great question for us all to ponder from time to time. To say, if I'm a Christian, what does that mean? It means I'm following Jesus. What about my life? What about my practices? What about the things that I engage in, or the things that I think, or the things that I say? Am I following Jesus? That's what's important. And so, much of the religious world has every intention of following Jesus, they never stop to think that what that means is that everything they do is to be measured by that.
When you see them a lot of times.
Belief does, certainly does. Yeah, it certainly does. She asked, when you see that word, does not mean faithful, and it certainly does. Okay, so Jesus says, those that follow him, those that keep his word, John 8:31, 32. We'll have some more to say on that in just a second. What does Jesus say would happen to those who did not believe in him? Okay, you would die in your sins. You know, this goes to a point that I think I made last week in my sermon. You know, it doesn't make any... I mean, while we're trying to follow Jesus with every aspect of our life and every fiber of our being, we do that as a matter of our response to God for what he's done for us through Jesus Christ. You and I know special people in the church that we just really, truly admire and love and know that they are walking very closely with the Lord. But you know what? At the end of the day, and by that I mean in the day of their death, and they go to heaven, they're getting to heaven by God's grace. I don't care how good they've been. I don't care what kind of model they've been. It's still by God's grace that they're getting to heaven. And we miss that a lot of times. I mean, and we read the Old Testament sometimes that way. We think about David, or we think about other people that are heroes of faith and that sort of thing. And yet, if you look closely at what the Bible tells us about these people, you know, there are some bad things that they did in their life. Really bad things. And, you know, and so we think, when we read the highlights or see the highlight film of their life, it's always the good stuff. We think, I can't do that. But on the other hand, you know, you look at the life of David, which was corrupt in a lot of ways. I'm just telling you. It was not good. But you see a man struggling through the Psalms, very penitent. You see the wrestling with sin and the darkness that was in his life that was coming from different corners of his life, and him trying to deal with it and talk to God about it. And so, you know, that's what you have when you talk about a man after God's own heart. He's struggling not to walk in the darkness, but to walk in the light. And so he is penitential Psalms, Psalms 32, Psalms 56, others. You know, he says, I know that the way of man, I'm sorry. He said, Lord, cleanse me from every false way. In that penitential psalm of Psalms 56 is where he says, that was Psalms 139 I quoted, cleanse me from every false way. Search me and try me, keep me from every false way. But in Psalms, I think it's 56. Let me make sure I get this right. No, Psalms 51. I didn't think that sounded exactly right. He's verse 3, for I know my transgressions, my sin is ever before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth and inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence. And take not your Holy Spirit from me. I mean, if you read that in the language and imagine David just in the grips of sin and pleading, there's a side to him that is very Godward in spite of his great failings. That is something you'll never find in Saul. That's the big difference. Yes, sir.
Illustrates what Jesus says in this section.
Yeah, good point.
The light of the world, and that people that would believe in him would not die in their sins. There's a woman who probably called darkness, right? He also challenged the scribes and Pharisees because do you have sin? Yes, they all left, right? And then he says, go and sin no more to the woman. That's the light. The light can expose sin, but also gives a path to getting out of it. Through Christ.
You know, you make a great point about light. I mean, light can cause you to go blind, but it can also help you see. You stare at the sun long enough, you go blind. You stare at the light long enough and do nothing, you're going to harden yourself. So, yeah, the same light that exposes sin can lead us out of it if we'll follow him. Yeah. Anything else? So we see these changes here. Now, we come then into a critical part of our study in verse 6. To whom did Jesus say, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth will set you free? Who did he say that to? Okay, the Jews that believed in him. That's who he said that to. Not all of them believed in him. Not all of them accepted. But he's talking to those Jews who believed in him. And, you know, this becomes important. And his point really here is, are you going to stand? Are you going to be able to withstand the assaults? You know, following Jesus is a matter of counting the costs. Following Jesus is understanding, as we've been talking about, being exposed to sin and then following on his path. Jesus said they wouldn't come to the light in John 3 because their deeds were evil. And so now, are you willing to do that? Then it said, they answered him, we are offspring of Abraham and never have been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? So how did the unbelieving Jews interpret what Jesus said about being made free? How did they interpret this? When Jesus said, you shall be set free, that you shall know the truth will set you free. How did they interpret that? Yeah, they took it, they're still struggling, but at least they're listening to what Jesus is saying. And they're sort of at this point where Nicodemus was when he said, well, shall a man enter into his mother's womb a second time? And they're saying, well, you're saying set free, but we've never really been slave to any man. How is it that you say we will become free? Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son remains forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are the offspring of Abraham, yet you seek to kill me because my word finds no place in you. I speak of what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have heard from your father. So in Jesus' illustration here, he's pointing out to them that there is as we look in the next part, there's a slavery from which Abraham's descendants are not exempt and which Abraham's merits could not affect. What is that? That's the slavery to sin. Abraham couldn't free them from that. And so Jesus gets right down on their level and says, look, I'm talking to you about the fact that I said, except you believe that I am he, you're going to die in your sin. You haven't got that point. Now I said, I'm going to set you free. And you're saying, but we've never been enslaved. And Jesus said, you're in slavery to that which not even Abraham can free you from. But I can give you that freedom, a freedom from sin. And so he said, I speak what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have heard from your father. And I mean, there's an underlying point he's going to really hammer here. Look at that statement. I speak of what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have heard from your father. Who's he talking about there when he says your father? Huh? Satan. That's exactly right. He's going to point that out in verse 44. He said, you are of your father the devil. I mean, so Jesus is not pulling any punches here. He's not being Mr. Positive with them. He's not trying to, love them into the kingdom. He's pointing out what you need to do. And right now, you're not living as God's children. You're living as the children of the devil. You're enslaved to sin. And all of those that are enslaved to sin are children of the devil. Children of wrath is what Paul would say in Ephesians 2. And so here, again, he's making that point to them about following him, what it means to walk in the light and not in darkness. So he points this out to them. And then question number 8, if they were the real children of Abraham, as they professed, they would hear and recognize Jesus, but since they didn't then, to whom did these unbelieving Jews belong? Children of the devil. They answered him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said, you have heard, he said, and you do what you've heard from your father. And they said, well, Abraham's our father. He said, if you are Abraham's children, you would be doing the works of Abraham. That you would be doing the works Abraham did. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. In other words, when Abraham heard from God and heard the truth from God, he did what God said. You are doing the works your father did. I mean, he's drilling down on this a little bit. He's disassociating them from Abraham. He's going to make the tie into them in just a moment, and it's going to sting. He said, you are doing the works your father did. They said to him, we were not born of sexual immorality. We have one Father, even God. Now they're saying, well, okay, ultimately, we're of God. No, you can't be of Abraham. If you're not of Abraham, you're not of God. And if you're not of God, you're not of Abraham. He went on to say, if God were your father, you would have loved me, for I came from God, and I am here. I came not of my own accord, but he sent me. One of the questions I think we have for next week, chapter 9, though, is, for all that Jesus did to be recognized, why don't they recognize him? He's saying, just look at the record. And as I've told you before, we don't really have in the New Testament record but just a small snippet of Jesus' life in terms of the number of days that are being involved in the things that he did. That's why John would say to us in the last chapter of John, there are many other things that he did, but the world couldn't contain all of the volumes of the works that he did. So there's much more here, folks, up to this point. What we're just reading are 7 signs in the Gospel of John that Jesus did. There were many, many, many more that Jesus did. I have no idea. All I can tell you is what John said. If every one of them were written down, the world couldn't contain the volume. Couldn't contain the volumes of the work that he did. So, what is their problem in having a difficulty to believe?
Way horses have the little binders on the side where they can only see in front.
Yeah.
A lot of people are that way. They don't want to accept what they believe, or they want to believe, and they don't want to let the light in.
Okay. They don't want to let the light in. They want to believe what they want to believe. It's just the prejudice. It's a heart issue. And that's what Jesus is trying to get them to see. This is a heart issue. This isn't a fact issue, that the facts aren't there to support what I'm saying. That's not the issue. Do you not understand? You don't believe. You've understood Abraham the way you've wanted to understand Abraham. You've understood the Old Testament the way you've wanted to understand the Old Testament.
But they're sinning. They think that they're okay, but they're really not.
And that's true. Yes, very much so. Okay? So, what he's pointing out here, but since they didn't, then to whom do these unbelieving Jews belong? Verse 44, you are of your father the devil. Can you imagine getting up and saying that? You're the father of the devil. Your dad's the devil. And your will is to do your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is of God, whoever belongs to God, hears the words of God. The reason why you do not hear them is that you are not of God. And then the Jews answered him, saying, are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Okay, they have called him everything but what he is. How do they come to this conclusion that he's a Samaritan, that he's a demon, that he's got a devil, that he's crazy? How do they come to that when they can't see the obvious in front of them? Jesus answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. The Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, as did the prophets, yet you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died, and the prophets died? Who do you make yourself out to be? Jesus answered, if I have glorified myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. But you have not known him. I know him. If I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you, but I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. So the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Bam! Mic drop. I mean, he goes right back to this, I am. Exodus 3, verse 14. When God appeared to Moses at the burning bush, tell him that I am. Jehovah. That's who that is. That's who Jesus is. I am. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of life. I am. All of those statements emphasize the fact that he is God, that he is Jehovah. That whether or not we can explain it makes no difference. The fact is he is who he said he is. And so he said they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. This is an important point if you ever discuss something with Jehovah's Witness, because they want to tell you that when you make the point that Jesus is God, and then you say, well, why did they try to stone him? Well, they didn't try to stone him for being God. Yeah, they did right here. As soon as he said, I am, they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself. How do you miss the point that Jesus is not Jehovah? Jesus comes from the Father. I was there at the beginning. I mean, in the beginning was God. In the beginning was the Word. Over and over, John is telling his readers. Remember, his readers are probably at least 40 years removed from the death of Jesus. Those to whom John is writing. And they knew these stories, and you know the reason the New Testament mentions names sometimes is because people know names, people know people. And so you can go to this person and ask them. That's why he uses names sometimes. But here, Jesus is pointing out to them, I am. There's no mistake. Nobody should ever mistake that. That Jesus, who Jesus is, what it means to be God. So this is the challenge that he has. I think that's the last of my questions. No, I got one more. Well, here it is. Why did they pick up stones to kill Jesus? And what was it that Jesus said that caused them to want to pick up stones? And we just talked about that, I thought. So, any comments or questions through John 8? Anybody have any questions?
Jesus said that he came from God.
Hang on, just make sure. Okay, Jesus makes the point that he came from the Father, he did not come on his own, and that they are, and that's the point that we made last Wednesday on the idea of how many times Jesus said, I am sent. meaning that he and the Father are one in whatever is being done. I am sent. I'm sent on this mission. I'm in perfect harmony with this mission. God sent me. My Father sent me. I am sent. You don't know the one that sent me. You don't know the way to the Father. So those are important lessons to learn from the Gospel of John. We'll talk about John 9 on Wednesday. All right. Thank you for listening.